Hello 108 students, Mr. McHugh here with you. Welcome back to section 5.4, and we are going to work on page 2 here, taking on objective number 4, where we're going to do the product of the sum or difference of two binomial terms. Okay, so what I try to do here is, if you look on the book here, you can see the rules, and that's all good. Again, this whenever you can learn and put it in your head, I think it's a lot easier to remember. So let me show you what I have here. So what I try to get you to, instead of using letters, and if you have a binomial, it's got a first term and a second term in it, and you multiply it by what I call, it's called the conjugate. Now, we don't learn this term till chapter 8, but I like using it early here because it's a way for us to communicate. A conjugate of a binomial is nothing more than the same first term and the same second term, but the big difference is the sign is different. So if you start with a plus, you go to a minus. If you start with a minus, you go to a plus. Now, I tease in class about conjugate. For me, was a concept I learned in French class when you had to conjugate verbs, and so or Spanish class, and if you've had those, then you kind of know what that meaning is relative to that, but that is not what it is in mathematics. What it is, it's a binomial, and you take its opposite, same binomial, but the opposite sign. Now, something's interesting. When you multiply a binomial by its conjugate, turns out you can learn a shortcut. Okay, now before we do the shortcut, let's come down here and do FOIL. Here's a binomial, p plus 7, and you're going to multiply by its conjugate. First term is the same, second term is the same, the only difference is the plus and the minus. Okay, so we do FOIL, first, outer, inner, last. First is p squared, outer is minus 7p, you guys know the drill. Inner is plus 7p, last is 7 times negative 7 is a minus 49. What happens with the inner and the outer terms, class? They add up to 0, thus leaving you p squared minus 49. Now, you can use FOIL, and you'll get by, but I really want you to start to see the difference of squares. And so if you see a binomial multiplied by its conjugate, the result is the first term squared minus the second term squared. So the answer to this, the shortcut, is to realize, take the first term and square it, p squared, take the second term and square it, 49, and you're done. Okay, now in this chapter we're going with multiplying polynomials, and that's all good. What happens here is, I got a little heads up here that when we get to chapter 6, you are going to be required to memorize and learn that if you see the difference of squares, such as p squared minus 49, you need to be able to factor it backwards into what are the two binomial factors. Okay, so not required today, but coming up shortly you will. So if you saw something like this, if you saw the difference of squares, which means the subtraction, I would say, can you take the square root of the first term? And you would say yes. Subtraction, can you take the square root of the second term? You'd say yes, thus leaving you p minus 7. Drop down the square roots, drop down the signs, p minus 7, and multiply it by its conjugate. Now, that's not for this homework, but that'll get you set up for chapter 6. Okay, so we got to get used to multiplying binomials. What happens if you have a binomial and it's squared? Finding the square of a binomial, whether it's a plus or a minus, and we're going to do this example 6 here in a minute. I'm going to do it the FOIL method to get you by, but the shortcut is to realize that if you have a binomial squared, you take the first term and square it, then you take the first term times the second term and double it. Now, I like to say it that way because it sticks out, or you could say 2 times the first term times the second term, and finally you take the second term and you square it. Okay, so rules I'm pointing on to are on page, this is on page 297 of your book. Up here, this was page 296. Okay, so you can, now the problem is, if you see X's and Y's, everybody tries to memorize letters. Forget that. Try to get the words into your head here. And here's how you're going to do this. Notice the plus and a minus sign here. It's the first term minus the middle term plus the second term. Okay, so what I like to do is here, let's try this example here. First thing, the quantity m plus 7 squared means you take the parentheses m plus 7 and you multiply times itself. That's the definition of what exponents mean. It means you take the base, you multiply it by itself that many times. Now up here, look at this note. What it never equals is the first term squared plus the second term squared and stop. Okay, make sure you remember that. That's a common mistake with algebra students. Okay. Now we come back down here and you write it out. You expanded it out, the definition of exponent. What do you see? Binomial times binomial, aka use FOIL. You've seen this before. M times m is m squared. Outer term 7m. Look at the middle term, or excuse me, the inner term. Also 7m. The outer and the inner are exactly the same. Last term 7 times 7 is 49. What happens with 7m plus 7m? 14m. It's like just as if you had taken the first term times the second term and doubled it. 7 times m is 7m times 2 is 14m. Okay? Now here's the shortcut. Realize you've taken a binomial, square it, and take the first term, square it. Multiply the two terms, drop down the sign, that's how I remember it. Take m times 7 and double it, and then finally take the second term and square it like that. Now you guys are going to do this a lot quicker. You're going to write the m squared, then you're going to write 2 times 7 is 14m, and then you'll write the 49. A lot of you will just do it in one step. Okay, so if this would have been a subtraction problem, let me see if I can squeeze this in here. Let's pretend this would have been m minus 7 quantity squared. Take the first term, square it. Multiply the two terms. M times negative 7 is negative 7m, and double it would be minus 14m. Take the second term, negative 7, and square it. Still leaves you a positive 49. And that would have been your answer. Okay, class, hey, we've done it. Got through page 2. When I see you on the next video, we'll be working on page 3. Okay, Mr. McHugh signing off for now, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.